松田学です。この松田政策研究所チャンネルではですね、311、悲惨なですね、東日本大震災、福島原発事故からちょうど10年ということで、この原発の問題も含めて放射線の問題ですね、これ大変皆さんも関心の高い問題だと思いますが、これにつきまして、この分野の専門家でありますアリソン先生にですね、イギリスとの間のズームで対談、第1回目はですね、基本的にどう考えたらいいのかという点を中心にですね、この放射線についてですね、お伺いしました。この番組はですね、放射線の正しい知識を普及する研究会、事務局長の高山三平さんからのですね、要請も受けまして、この皆さんにこの正しい知識をお届けしようということで企画をしております。今回は将来に向けた課題ということで、菅総理に対する提言もできればちょっとアリソン先生に聞いてみたいなというふうに思っています。アリソン先生、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
It was also at Chernobyl. So we come to our second question. How can we build popular trust in nuclear? First, as we've already seen, people should realize that they're much more familiar with radiation than they think they are. It's here, in sunshine and life-saving medical treatment. Radioactivity is natural. Inside us, in onsen and spas. Secondly, people should realize that studying radiation is not hard, but needs public lectures and a little bit of private reading by some people with advice. How about some advice from famous and respected authorities? With confidence from academic science and medicine, not commercial industry. People should make measurements to reassure and do simple calculations. As I've said, some of those can be done at school, for instance, for food and water. We should discuss waste and reprocessing. They should learn a bit more about internal radiation and why it is safer than radiation that is shone in acutely. And they should discuss why people have different views and where they go wrong. So now I'm going to look at each of those ideas. Sunshine is radiation, but most of it can't break chemical bonds, so it can't wreak the havoc that ultraviolet can. Ultraviolet, which sits in the spectrum between sunlight and X-rays, can break molecules and does, and on holiday, as we all know, if you have too much sunshine, two things can happen. One is you will get sunburn and the cells of your skin will die and they will peel off, but you'll recover from that. That is cell death. And the other thing that can happen is that years later you can get skin cancer. Exactly parallel with the situation with the other parts of the radiation spectrum. Of course, we should cancel holidays and take our summer holidays deep underground. Maybe we would take them in the winter only, if we were still worried. But with sense, with care, we can manage our natural protection, and we do, and enjoy sunny holidays with the children where we give them a good advice as well. It would be good if we could take a similar attitude to nuclear radiation, to low-dose X-rays and other radiation. We should remind people of the life-giving benefits of medical radiation. Japanese healthcare is as good as any in the world. The radiation is exactly the same as the radiation in the environment, we need to establish respect and trust. Where are they to be found? Well, we're not the only people who have a problem establishing respect and trust with the public. Bankers need to, for good reason. And what do? They put pictures of great scientists and thinkers on banknotes, and some other people as well, to add gravitas to those grubby pieces of paper that they sell us. Well, we should do likewise. Here are a few. Mary Curie, of course. She's appeared on both Polish and French banknotes. Charles Darwin, naturally. Florence Nightingale, of whom more later. Adam Smith, the natural philosopher and economist. They speak with one voice about not being afraid. Adam Smith would see fear of radiation as pure superstition, as dangerous and irrational as fear of an economic bubble or a stampede. Mary Curie and Florence Nightingale agree. A recent Egyptian Nobel laureate puts it succinctly: fear does not prevent death, it prevents life. And what did Florence Nightingale actually do? She was a famous early statistician and a very powerful advocate. She got data, she drew pictures that explained her data, and she showed them to those in authority in her day, with some vehemence, I suspect. Her work inspired me to draw the simple area diagrams that I showed earlier. And what is the significance of the science that they taught us? Darwin would tell us how evolution has matched life and its repair kit to our actual radiation and oxygen environment. Ignoring this and trying to do better with UN committees is like keeping a dog and then learning to bark yourself. But like Florence Nightingale, we should make measurements. For instance, for internal radiation that has worried many in Japan, we should compare the highest cesium-137 measurement recorded for the public, which in fact is 1,400 becquerels in the whole body, with the natural potassium in the body, which we all have and have had since the beginning of time. It's about half. Also, we should compare that 1,400 becquerels with the dose at Goiânia, which was exactly the same, but at least 10,000 times higher and without cancer in 25 years. So this must be good news. There's no chance that anybody's going to get cancer from cesium-137. And there's no chance that they will get thyroid cancer either. There's no time to go into the detail, but iodine is so plentiful in the Japanese diet, but it wasn't at Chernobyl. The release at Chernobyl was far higher than the release at Fukushima, and potassium iodide pills were given and were not given at Chernobyl, but in many cases they were at Fukushima. Simple calculations expose the folly of the food and water regulations. On this slide I have shown what any high school student with a little half an hour of education could learn to do. Such regulations are designed to appease, but in fact what they do is create mistrust. We can compare nuclear wastes with other forms of waste. Nuclear waste is tiny in comparison with CO2 or personal waste. Nuclear waste does not spread or multiply by thermal chain reaction like fire. It cannot be caught and spread by chain reaction like disease in biological waste. Its famous chain reaction can only occur inside a working nuclear reactor. Nuclear waste is not discharged into the environment, not into the air like CO2 from fire. It is not discharged into water, or worse, like personal biological waste. It can be cooled and stored in solid or liquid form for a decade or more. Nuclear waste is 95% unused fuel, and that can be reused. Fission products are truly spent and can be separated from the actinides, as they're called, including plutonium, which have not yet been fissioned. The unused fuel and the plutonium can be reused, as I said, in a normal reactor. The actinides can be burnt up in a fast neutron reactor. Several of these have been built. The fission fragments, can be buried and are harmless in a few hundred years. This is shown on this next slide. If waste is not reprocessed and not separated into these constituents, its value is discarded and its lifetime, the lifetime for which it remains radioactive, is vastly extended. There has never been a reason to do this, but President Carter misguidedly discontinued work on fast reactors in the US in 1977 as an anti-nuclear move. In summary, there is nothing exceptional about nuclear waste, only that people are afraid of it, and their concern is completely unjustified. So what does frighten people? Well, this slide shows that displays of authority, that is dressing people up in protective suits and goggles and breathing apparatus, can frighten them. What they need is explanation and understanding. The sight of officials and politicians in protective gear digging up your children's playground is enough to put any parent to fright. People are also frightened as a result of Cold War propaganda. The friendly fire effect from fear of radiation, which we were all fed with, including me, over the years, these fears persist. They're not justified. If people are told that they have been irradiated, simple people in the countryside are told that they have been irradiated, like at Fukushima or at Chernobyl, it's like telling a medieval peasant that they have been cursed. They don't know what to do about it. They become depressed, and very often they will die. There's medical account of this sort of thing, when in fact there is nothing wrong. This is the real power of voodoo and witchcraft. The appeasement of fear with inept ALARA regulations provides a short-term sticking plaster to public worries, but in the longer term it sows distrust and misunderstanding. This mistaken strategy goes all the way up to the United Nations. It is an international, not a Japanese problem. In fact, it's not a problem, it's a crime. Fear should be treated with explanations and education, not regulation. Finally, engaging in stories of blame and secrecy are inflammatory. Technical and personal understanding are a more effective way than finding fault when something goes wrong. So finally, who still says that nuclear radiation is dangerous, and why? Well, of course, many jobs in the fossil fuel business depend on retaining the status quo. Similarly, in the regulation and safety industries, and there are many people and many jobs there. In fact, about half the cost of nuclear is safety or fear related. Half of the jobs in the industry could go with benefit. Many experts would be affected, and so they do not speak in favour of such a change. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas. Most other people remain silent. They're still influenced by the Cold War propaganda and the books and films that came with it. They're not familiar with the physical and medical science, and they believe and have been brought up to think that nuclear is very hard and not for them to understand, and they feel a bit inhibited. How about doctors? They should understand. Well, most doctors, I'm glad to say, put their patients' health first rather than making political points, and I'm glad my doctor does. Some people are frightened, genuinely. The language that they use tells that. They're based on fear, not science. There are others who are seeking or receiving compensation, and they are not going to propose any change. There are a few academics whose narrow interests, research interests, are centred on whether they can get replacement of their research grants, and they are happy with the status quo. So that doesn't leave very many of us looking at the situation as a whole. So we can come to the last slide and look at the conclusions. The first conclusion is that, very clear, that radiation is not a threat to the world order. It's not a global danger like political and economic instability, environmental change, population, food, water. The second conclusion is that the UN safety guidance should be made based on science, not on appeasement. Current safety advice should be replaced to reduce nuclear costs by a large fraction. Third conclusion, education at all levels would remove the stigma of nuclear. We should build trust in science and society with explanations in simple terms. An uninformed democracy is unstable. If we give votes to people who don't understand what's going on, we're asking for trouble. Current public attitudes to nuclear safety give authoritarian regimes an advantage. Russia is building 28 reactors. 19 of those are abroad. Democracies are in danger of becoming uncompetitive. Fifth, Japan should restart its existing nuclear power plants, and closures should cease everywhere. All waste should be processed. Waste is not an exceptional danger. States should invest in more nuclear and fast reactors now, and in thorium and fusion for the future. Thank you.
まず最初にですね、菅総理は政権に誕生してすぐにですね、日本が2050年にはいわゆるカーボンニュートラル、これを実現すると公約に掲げました。原発に頼らずにですね、このカーボンニュートラルを実現する、実質ゼロですね、二酸化炭素排出ゼロ、これを実現することは可能かとお考えでしょうか。
No, I don't. Certainly not. Most of what I have been doing in the last couple of years is looking at the use of energy by life, from plants to animals to early humans to the Industrial Revolution, to looking at all of the sources of energy available to us. And the only possibility is now is nuclear power, if with the with the number of people and standard of living that we expect. Renewables are weak, unreliable, and destructive of the environment. We see in the newspapers today and yesterday of what is happening in Texas. The whole of their power system has been frozen, literally, by the effect of snow and ice on windmills. And the same thing happens with solar farms, and hurricanes trash solar farms very quickly. Whereas nuclear is small, it has a small footprint in nature, and it's not, it is very resilient, well protected against the weather and changes of climate, especially the newer designs. They can be made even smaller and even more resilient. So if we want the population that we have and economic stability and social stability, we have to go to have nuclear power on a big scale. It needs to be global because the climate change is global. We're not actually talking about Japan or Britain. Too much talk in the UK is about what the UK is going to do, and I'm sure it's the same in Japan. This is a world problem. It's like the vaccine. The virus has shown us that what we need are scientific solutions and people working across boundaries and providing maybe multiple solutions, multiple designs of nuclear reactors to go back to nuclear. That's all fine and healthy, but we've got to do it all together and then provide the whole of the world, just not the rich world, with nuclear power. And that means that they have, in all countries, have to understand nuclear technology. So we have another educational aim must be to teach people. And so the teaching of people and the educational requirement in the third world is going to be as take 30 years, and so is the construction of the nuclear power plants in the third world but first of all, we must persuade Japan to turn its nuclear power plants on.
ありがとうございます。いろいろなエネルギー源の選択肢が議論されてますが、再生可能エネルギーですね、これは将来的に、これにもう、頼れるというふうに考えてよろしいのかどうかですね。超高性能の蓄電池という話も出てます。大量に使用して、電力供給の要とするという考え方も出てますけれども、それは可能かどうか、そのあたりいかがでしょうか。
Well, the idea of a battery is very seductive. It's a bucket where you can put your surplus energy in, and when you want it, you get it out again. But life is not so simple. A chemical battery is limited by the laws of chemistry. What goes on in there is a chemical store of the same kind as the chemical store in food or coal or any other chemical forms of energy storage. But because one of the requirements is that you have to be able to get it out again very easily and quickly, there's a problem of its stability. And we know that fire and chemistry are not always very stable. For instance, the bomb it wasn't a bomb, the explosion of fertilizer in Beirut last year caused immense damage. If you work out the amount of energy on the back of an envelope, just the amount of energy that is used by the UK electricity in a day, it's 1,000 times the Beirut bomb. So you have to ask, if you did have a battery which was big enough to store the energy of the UK electrical energy for hours and days, how big would it be? And it would be very big, like 1 million tons, and it would be 1,000 Beirut bombs. So it's very dangerous. So the next thing you can do, and this is something one can do now, go on the internet and type in battery fires and see what comes up. And I did this the other day in February this month, and I found a report in Korea of 20 fires of electricity storage batteries. And the government in Korea, the ministry, said they couldn't understand the cause of them. Well, it's perfectly obvious. If you store energy, it can easily get out by mistake. You don't need a match to discharge a battery. It's got the wiring, the detonator in there, and it can explode or create a fire very quickly. And then I equally found a report from Arizona of a huge battery fire. And there they had been more cautious and they had begun to understand. And then the insurance industry comes in and says, oh, it's dangerous. You have to insure it. And the insurance costs money. So safety of batteries and indeed their feasibility on their size of 1 million tons of batteries, no. Batteries that are big enough to bridge the times when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you can't build batteries that big safely and reliably.
ありがとうございます。もう一つ原子力発電の方なんですけれども、この大きな問題はですね、使用済み核燃料の処分の問題、原子力発電を使い続ける場合に、この問題はやっぱりどうしてもですね、世界各国ともですね、この処理に苦しんでいるという状態だと思います。で、そのまま放置すれば安全なレベルまで放射線量が低下するというところまでは16万年以上かかるというふうに言われていますが、人類社会が納得するような処理の方法っていうのはあるのでしょうか？
It's not a big problem. Let me explain. Because nuclear fuel is 1 million times as much energy per kilogram as chemical energy, there's 1 million times less fuel and 1 million times less waste, so that the amount of waste is very small. There's never been a serious accident caused by waste. There's lots of people running around frightened of it, but show me where it has caused a big serious accident. Third, it's valuable. Most of the energy in nuclear waste hasn't been used for physical and chemical reasons to do with the manufacture of the fuel rods and the neutron flux and so on in the operation of the reactor. It's only used about 1 or 2% of the energy in the nuclear fuel. So you can reprocess it and extract the fuel and use that fuel again somehow, and just throw away the part that has already fissioned. The only problem in all this is fear of nuclear, and that's got to be solved anyway. So that's a matter of leadership, education, and public information, and I've already been talking about that.
ありがとうございます。使用済み核燃料というのはですね、再処理をして燃料として活用するとですね、多くのエネルギーが得られますしですね、しかも危険性はおよそ500年でなくなると言われてますが、日本は高速増殖炉でですね、それを行おうとしているんですけれども、アメリカをはじめイギリスでも、その研究が実際の炉の建設につながっているということにはなってないようですが、これはなぜなのでしょうか？
The answer really is economics. At the moment, it is still cheaper to dig new uranium out of the ground and make fresh fuel. But that may not be true in the future. It's just a question of which is easiest. We have the choice in the future as to whether we use new uranium or whether we use process spent fuel. If spent fuel is a problem, then we can use it. And we can do that in more than one way.
ありがとうございます。もう一つですね、トリウム炉っていうのがあってですね、これ安全だとされているんですが、こちらが普及しないのはなぜなのか教えていただけませんでしょうか。トリウム。
Well, as I say, it's economic. We have a choice between whether we use new fuel or old fuel, or indeed later soon we will use thorium, or whether much more in the future we use fusion power. These are all options. They're not problems, and it's as I say, it's a strength of the nuclear case that there are many different technologies that are available. And science, and I look at it from a science point of view, does not need to dictate which is economically the best thing to do.
ありがとうございます。
It could be different. In 50 years' time, it could be a different choice.
わかりました。あとですね、原発については、小型原子炉というものですね、次世代原発の実用化ということが言われているんですが、その見通しといいますか、実用化のですね、でこれで原発に関する問題も解決されるというふうに考えてもよろしいんでしょうか。
Today's big reactors don't really have any problems except publicity and complexity. They have been made too complicated trying to appease the fear that people have of nuclear reactors. That is quite unnecessary. They should be made simpler and cheaper and smaller and local, so that instead of nuclear reactors being organized from Tokyo, they are the matter locally, which I think they are. There is, to some extent, that is already true in Japan. Responsibility is taken locally, but it's not sufficiently well informed. So in time, with more familiarity and more confidence and more local knowledge, small modular reactors are going to be seen as much better. And then industry and hydrogen and hydrogen steel making, as well as electricity generation and hydrogen for local heating and so on. These will all be based around small communities, of 100 or 200,000 people, but not requiring enormous reactors supervised by high-level government, or worse, the United Nations.
ありがとうございます。それから将来のエネルギーとして核融合ということがですね、目指されているんですが、実用化がいつ頃でと考えられるかということとですね、最近中国が、人工太陽の開発を進めているというニュースがあるんですけれども、将来核融合、中国が主導する可能性はないかどうか。それはですね、核融合の開発の上でですね、現在のような、大型原発を稼働させていることが何か役に立つというようなことはないかどうかですね、ちょっとお伺いできるでしょうか。
Fusion reactors are another technical or scientific possibility, but there's a lot of technical work to be done, mainly to do with materials. The lifetime of reactors of all kinds depends on how long the materials last under the extreme conditions. And as the years have gone on, we've learned how to build nuclear reactors with materials that survive and can be replaced, so you can replace pieces. And recently, in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was discussing whether they would consider the possibility of approving fission reactor lifetimes to 100 years. Now, fusion reactors are way behind that. We have established that we know the sun works. We have managed to make that physics work and produce energy on Earth, but not for a long time, and not with materials that can stand it. And I'm sure this will happen, but it's many decades away, and it's important that this kind of work that goes on, as I say, internationally. So it is not a solution to climate change. It's far too far in the future for that. The solution to climate change is, first of all, to to get the existing reactors online now and get the small modular reactors in the next 15 years deployed around the world on a massive scale to replace essentially all sources of carbon fuels and indeed renewables as far as grid is concerned.
ありがとうございます。それでは今までいろんな質問を、してきましたけれども、最後にですね、踏まえながらですね、お聞きしたいんですが、福島原発事故、ちょうど10年経ちます。この10年を10周年を迎えてですね、菅総理、日本の菅総理に対して、原発とかエネルギー政策について、アドバイスをがあればですね、教えていただければと思います。
Well, it's a great honor to be asked a question like this. Of course, I answer for my grandchildren because they are the ones to whom it will matter that Japan does the right thing. This is a 30-year problem between now and 2050. Climate change is going to go on getting worse for several hundred years. And what we're talking about not is curing climate change, but learning to live with it. That means having power sources that are resilient and are not making it worse. And fossil fuel makes it worse, and renewables are not resilient. So what should we do in the next 30 years? I hope that without delay, the existing nuclear power stations in Japan should be turned on. And similar advice, please, to in Germany and the United States. Stop turning power stations off. Most power stations have much longer lives than people think. We're not looking for excuses to turn. We should not be looking for excuses to turn nuclear power stations off. But on the longer scale, we need to start an educational problem in schools, like Japan has learned how to teach about earthquakes and tsunamis to students at school. I was immensely impressed going to Japan and visiting schools to see the preparedness of Japanese society for earthquakes and tsunamis. It can be done. You've done it. You just need to do the same thing for radiation. And when I say not just teaching them facts, school children to be invited to take a smoke detector to pieces, to see the source, the radioactive source inside in the smoke detector, to learn that in fact this is made from nuclear waste, americium. It only comes from nuclear waste. They should take it to pieces. It's completely harmless. When I was in the teaching physics in Oxford in the laboratories, I would tell the students they could eat the radioactive sources they were working with, but please don't, because we need them for the next lot of students as well. But they are not harmful. So that's education. We also need education for the next generation of engineers. What do you need to build a nuclear power station? You really need people who know how to do it. That's most of the cost of a nuclear power station, is the people who know what to do. There's nothing, it's just concrete and electronics and so on. That's That's the magic, is the knowledge. We need international collaborations to build prototype small nuclear reactors. This is what governments should be doing now. The American government is beginning to do it. The UK government is talking about it, but not doing it. And other countries should be doing it as well. In Japan, there is the GE Hitachi reactor design, which is looking very popular, but these things need to be developed internationally. We're not talking about making Japan great again or anywhere else great again. We're not talking about what some countries have inherited after World War II. We're talking about what is going to make the world inhabitable for all the people in the next few centuries. But we can help the education of third world countries. I was invited to Jakarta a couple of years ago, and Nate said after my a day of lectures, they said, "What should we do?" And I said, "You should learn, because the time will come when you can build, when you're ready to build a nuclear reactors, if your population knows about them popularly and you have enough experts in the community to do it. If you wait for China or Russia to come and give you one, that's going to be disastrous because you're not going to know what to do with it." And if you looked at what happened at Chernobyl, part of the problem is that the Russian operators had gone home and the locals didn't know enough about the reactors that they were left with, and they did silly things. So getting an educated workforce is absolutely essential part of safety. And Japan is well positioned to do all of these things. As I say, I think the story of the vaccines is very encouraging. It has shown us how fast we can work together, and politicians have not realized how fast and how well some of the scientists work together across boundaries. Otherwise, we will probably have, and we probably will have, like they are having in Texas as we speak, more blackouts, failure of renewables, destruction in extreme weather conditions, and that is what is going to push the public opinion and get it to forget about the horrors of the past and concentrate on the horrors of the future and making sure they don't happen. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました。いろいろ我々が正しい知識をやっぱりですね、教育に普及していくっていうかですね、それに基づいて国際協力、次世代原発、小型原発とかいろんな可能性がある中で国際協力も進めていかなきゃいけない。いろんな提言もありました。このお話、皆さんどう受け止めるか、一人一人がこの311 10周年にあたってですね、これからのエネルギーの在り方を考える上でご参考にしていただければと思います。アリソンさん、どうもありがとうございます。Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
See you again.